Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back. Harmless Dave here, otherwise known as the Real Music Observer, observing real music in real time for real people just like you and just like me. You know, you read a lot of articles about the history of Fleetwood Mac, and you hear a lot of talk about what went on, say, during the 1980s. The band had a bit of a dark period between Mirage and Tango in the Night, and people were wondering if this band was ever going to get back together again. Stevie Nicks had a solo career going, but it was starting to do this as each album, even though it sold well, became a little less, you know, popular than the previous album. Christine McVie had put out one really good solo album, and then again her solo career kind of tanked after that. Mick Fleetwood, he was involved in a lot of different projects, including his own band, which he had an album in the early 80s and then again resurfaced in the early 90s. Some of that material is fairly good, and he did surround himself with a lot of great musicians. The problem is that he just didn't have the gravitas to pull it off like the other members in the band. Even John McVie had his Got a Band thing, which of course didn't do very well at all. By the end of the decade, though, I think each band member was beginning to kind of change. And in the sense of Lindsey Buckingham, his change was from getting away from some of these external party behaviors, all of the self-indulgence of the 1980s with that white powdery substance, which was everywhere, whether you were on Wall Street or you were a sales guy. If you remember the 1980s, those expense accounts were often pumped up so people could go out and entertain one another. And it wasn't the nice smokable substance, the stuff from the 1970s and 1960s. This was more hardcore, and I know for a fact that one member of the band feared that a hole would be, in her nose at some point if she continued on with that type of behavior. And I think Lindsey Buckingham grew up, and I think a lot of these, I don't want to say everybody in the band, I think everybody handled their fame differently. And the growing up part. Lindsey, I think, was a heartbroken man from his relationship with Stevie. And if anybody was going to fall hard off the wagon, it would probably be him. But it didn't end up being him. He soldiered on, got through the decade, did release a great solo album in the early 1990s. At that point, radio was starting, of course, to drift away from a classic rock or a melodic rock sound and more into an angry, dark, grungy sound. Fleetwood Mac was not going to be able to adapt to that. A lot of bands weren't adapting, and some waited until the heart of that storm passed. That's why you saw Fleetwood Mac emerge in the 2000s, even though they put out an album in the late 90s. They were, I think, more successful in the early 2000s. But the point of this video is it seems as though there was a maturing that Buckingham went through. Of course, then he meets his future wife, and he gets married, and he gets grounded, and that really changes him. I mean, he made a great decision there to get married because, if you've found your soulmate, life gets so much better, and you're able to bounce things off of somebody. You're able to share your struggles and your heartaches. The picture that Lindsey Buckingham or Kristen shared of Lindsey in the hospital, that's a husband and wife moment where you think to yourself, thank God that guy has a wife who cares about him, because that's a bond that not only is hard to break in those situations, but it's essential. It's essential for recovery. You need somebody around you like that. And I think Buckingham always wanted that. I think he was a complicated guy. And I think, in his past, back in the 70s, maybe he didn't have the greatest work ethic. You hear this story about, there's clothing strewn all over the floor, and these guys are smoking pot and they're not paying attention to what's going on. And that story where it looks like there's one person taking care of everybody. I don't know how accurate that is. I mean, it might be somewhat accurate. Maybe there's some truth to it. But you got to look at the way Lindsey Buckingham responded to what's happened to him recently in interviews. I mean, things like they've lost perspective, and the relationship between himself and Stevie is fragmented. I mean, he chooses his words like an adult, like somebody who's grown up and who doesn't want to burn bridges, because these people were all his friends. I mean, if you look at what Kristen Buckingham was tweeting prior to this stuff, and she even had a couple of messages to me before I left Twitter, she said things like, these people just ghosted. They got up, they walked away. And it's not just that they walked away from Lindsey Buckingham as a musician. They walked away from him as a friend. And to me, I don't think that's the part that can be forgiven. I mean, you can forgive anybody of anything, and I think Lindsey is the right guy to forgive. But from a fan perspective, you can see why a lot of fans just don't get this. Like, there's no acknowledgement of Lindsey. There's very little at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There's almost none. There's almost zero acknowledgement from the band after Lindsey went under the knife, and his vocal cords could be, we don't know. The Buckinghams are private people, and I respect their privacy. So, all that to say, there's a certain maturity level that I think Lindsey began to sort of gain in the 1980s, and then through his marriage, and then today, he just seems to be a much more adult, mature person who understands life and the big picture. Whereas everybody else, they're all still chasing that dream. Lindsey, I think, is happy in his own skin, and he doesn't need to chase the dream anymore. He's chased it, and he's achieved it. I think what he wanted to do was just ride that wave off into the sunset. And these other people, I don't know. Could be money. Could be some sort of ego issue. Could be an insecurity that they all have, that they have to keep going. I think the big surprise in all of this is Christine McVie. I think she was grounded when she was away from the band. I think she was very grounded, and then she came back, and I think now, who knows? I think she was good for a while, but this talk about how great the band is without Lindsey, or they're the best band they've ever been, just say you're doing good. Things are good. I like the band. You don't have to say that, because that's a lie. Anybody can see that. They're not the best band they've ever been. They're an adequate cover band for the music they have to play. Well, let's just put that out there. All right, done with this video. It's about maturity. It's about Lindsey Buckingham being the adult in the room, and the rest of the band may be a little stunted when it comes to personal growth. But anyway, we'll see you soon.